Oh, hi, everybody. waitingfornextyear.com podcast. I'm your host, Craig Lindell, and you know that. And having kind of a frustrating week on the podcast. None of my guest things are coming together. None of them are coming together. And it's just, isn't that just perfect? Coming off maybe the best month in podcast history, to not be able to get a guest to book properly and not be able to get any of my scheduling things to come together. I had some big things lined up. Everything fell out. The bottom just fell out. But I don't want it to detract from what a great month it was for us on the Waiting for Next Year podcast. It started with Scott Rabb. It had Aaron Goldhammer. It had, sports yelling, Dan Lobby. It had, I'm sure I'm forgetting names. It was just an awesome month. The fact that I could forget any of the names who were on this month just goes to show what kind of a month it was. So many of you listened, and I really, really appreciate it, and I want to thank you for that. But today, a bit of a solo podcast. We've got 2 games into the Major League Baseball regular season, and it just occurs to me that at this moment, I don't know that I can consider myself to be a Browns first fan, and it's the first time in a very long time where I could say that. I was thinking back to 2010 when LeBron left, and every couple of months I would think about, well, which team has the best chance of turning it around, and which team is most deserving of my attention based on their possibility of becoming successful. And for the longest time, I thought that I could make the case that it was the Browns. I really did. You had the league where the ownership was willing to spend to the max of their abilities. You had the league with the most parity. You had the league where the draft was such a big deal. And for the longest time, it seemed to me that the Browns were the best hope for quality sports in Cleveland. And that is just absolutely not the case right now. But back then, LeBron had left, and the landscape of the NBA was a bunch of superstars and super teams that seemed like they had been put together by Marvel Comics. The Miami Heat, the way the Spurs did it, it was impossible to say, all right, well, you're just going to copy that model. And even you'd look at the Oklahoma City model when they still had Kevin Durant and Westbrook and Harden and all those things. And it still all started with finding a way to draft and develop Kevin Durant. And even then, they never won a championship. And so it felt impossible. It felt impossible in the NBA. Same with Major League Baseball. And this is not just a typical Dolan's or cheap type rant, but even beyond the Indians not historically being at the top of the free agency spending, that team drafted so poorly for so long, there was no way to project them as a team that could fill the meat and potatoes part of the roster so that they could sign 1 or 2 guys to put them over the top. If those drafts had ever produced anything, you might have thought maybe there's a chance. But there was no reason to believe. There was no reason to believe that the Cleveland Indians, as run by the Dolans and Mark Shapiro, were ever going to be the best chance. And so I realistically, or at least I convinced myself it was realistic, thought that the best chance of success was the Browns. And for the longest time, that was the truth. And now I'm sitting here watching, I'm just spoiled watching the Cavaliers and the Indians. And the Browns have a quadrillion picks in the top 50. They've got 2 picks in the top 12. They've got the number 1 overall pick. They did a good job in free agency bolstering the offensive line. And I still have a hard time believing that they have any chance whatsoever. There's no plan at quarterback. There's no plan at quarterback. But there was no plan at quarterback back when I thought the Browns were my best chance. So was I just a complete and utter fraud back in 2010 and 11 and 12 when I thought the Browns had the best chance and the best possibility? I had underrated the quarterback position, or maybe overrated the people that they had in the quarterback position. I don't know. Maybe now I'm overrating the position. I don't know. But it does, even with all those things going for the Browns, it feels like they have zero chance because, I mean, you're talking, the number one depth chart guy right now is Cody Kessler. But before we get there, they traded for maybe the worst free agent signing in the history of the most important position in sports when they traded for Brock Osweiler. So the Browns have Brock Osweiler and Cody Kessler. Cody Kessler was downgraded by his own organization, at least indirectly, when in pre-draft talk they talked about wanting quarterbacks who were at least 6'2" or taller. And Cody Kessler, of course, is 6'1". And it's amazing. It's amazing. And I don't say this to be, oh, woe is me, Browns. I say this because I went to the Cavaliers game against the 76ers last Friday, and the crowd was a little bit tepid. You know, during the announcements, I think the regular season not only has gotten a little bit stale for LeBron James, it's gotten a little bit stale for Cavaliers fans. And the fans, it's a long season for fans too, we sometimes forget. But if you were able to take what any regular season game in 2017 with LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Love, and not even to mention the people that they've added and the people on this roster, and you were able to really put it in perspective of the long tail history of the Cleveland Cavaliers, you know, some of those teams that we watched with Terrell Brandon and Phils and Hill and Mike Fratello's Cavaliers, the idea that you could ever have a tepid response to the announcing of the Cavaliers roster in 2017, it would be inconceivable. I'm not criticizing Cleveland fans. We all kind of lose perspective for the long term when we're embroiled in the short term and we're in the middle of a long season that doesn't really mean anything till the playoffs show up. I get it. The perspective is there. But I'm trying to maintain that longer, larger perspective as well, because I know what it's like to watch the Cavaliers lose to the Los Angeles Lakers by 50. I know what it's like, and you know what it's like. And to think that you could have even a half-hearted response to player intros to a Cavaliers game against the 76ers in 2017 as they're looking to secure their seeding in the playoffs to defend their championship. I mean, you want to talk about losing perspective for the long term and the long run, that's losing perspective. And that's not a criticism. It's just, it's very interesting to note. And I felt the same way watching the first two Indians games of the season. Again, you know, obviously 2 wins. But you place this perspective of the Indians adding Edwin Encarnacion to a team that appears to have Michael Brantley back, that has Jose Ramirez emerging as a legit all-star candidate, not to mention Carlos Santana, and that's even before you get to the pitching staff. You're talking about a pitching staff that includes arguably the best pitcher in baseball. At any point in time, you could argue that Corey Kluber is the best pitcher in baseball. He's a Cy Young Award winner. I think you could say they arguably have the best reliever in the game in Andrew Miller, who's not even your closer. To think that we are being spoiled right now, and not to say that we don't deserve it or that we haven't earned it, but just placing the perspective there that we get to watch this team game in and game out for the entire year, and they might not achieve, they might fall on their faces, but in terms of having an opportunity and having something to believe in headed into a season, this is unbelievable. We've got a team to watch on TV that could put up softball scores all year long. We've got a team that could get 15 homers out of somebody like Yan Gomes. It's unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable, and I want to appreciate it. And I want to appreciate it in the prism of having been and being a Browns first Cleveland sports fan who maybe realistically believed that they had the best chance of achieving once upon a time not so far in the distant past. It was very recent. It was very recent that I was a believer in the Browns as the best hope of a Cleveland championship. And here we sit with the reigning NBA champs and the team that went to Game 7 of the World Series and nearly pulled it out and got better. And so I don't want to lose perspective. I don't want to lose perspective of any of that as we head into the meat of the baseball season, as we head toward the playoffs in the NBA season, and as we head into a less than exciting NFL draft. And maybe that's as much as anything. I'm just not excited for the NFL draft this year. If you believe what Zach Jackson reports that scouts are saying about Myles Garrett, that he's about as can't miss and unbelievable a prospect as we've seen in any, in recent history of the NFL draft, maybe we should be over the moon about this draft, but I can't be. I just can't be, Seeing is believing, and when you're seeing in your other two sports, your other two teams, it really adjusts the burden of proof. A lot of people would think that maybe the Cavaliers winning would provide cover to the Indians and to the Browns, and to a certain extent it kind of does, but it also puts pressure on the Browns where they don't get the benefit of the doubt. Seeing is believing, and there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to do it. If the Cavaliers and Indians can be competitive in 2017, after 20-ish years of watching them try and pull it off in Cleveland with the Browns, there's no reason why they shouldn't have the same burden of proof as everybody else. And that's kind of where we are with the Browns. It's pretty unbelievable. All right, so that's that. I wanted to tell you a little bit about another podcast that I listened to, and it's kind of come under fire, but I listened to S-Town, which was short for Shit Town, which kind of extrapolated the what it's like to live in rural Alabama, and maybe it paints just a part of a picture of rural Alabama, and maybe it's an unfair portrayal. If you start using any portrait of a culture and use it as shorthand for that culture, you're probably not being sensitive. You're probably not giving a realistic take on what, that culture actually is. It's not the entirety. But I enjoyed this podcast. For entertainment purposes, it was really valuable. I don't know if it tells the tale culturally, but it was good storytelling, and it was good twists and turns. But it's kind of like when you talk about documentaries. Some of the most entertaining documentaries aren't necessarily the most truthful documentaries, I guess. I guess that's how I would say it. Michael Moore comes under fire for skewing the facts and making himself a part of the story and doing things for drama. And I don't think anybody would really deny that those things happen. And what's good for storytelling isn't always good for the 100% version of the truth, I guess. But S-Town was really entertaining. It was a guy from Alabama who thought that a murder was being covered up in his town. And he thought that maybe the cops were crooked. And he thought that based on some rumor and innuendo around his community, that maybe a powerful family, a rich, powerful family, had gotten a murder covered up. And that quickly, in the first couple episodes, that falls by the wayside, and the story shifts. And the guy who initially contacted them becomes a part of the story, and we start to uncover him and the mysteries surrounding him and his life. And we do get a few different smaller portraits of different people in that town. But to think that they're indicative of all rural culture in the South is probably not fair, probably not true. But it was interesting. It was a fun listen, and I would recommend it to anybody, even while I would say, yeah, I don't know how indicative it is of the quote unquote truth, the truth. But what is that? The truth anymore is just like tiny little snippets. It's a little pieces. We don't really ever get... There's no such thing as a full picture of the truth in anything. I mean, whether we're talking about sports coverage or an entertaining podcast, a documentary, it's this idea, and I feel like this, especially when you're judging friends and family and people for their personal lives, every perspective you have is an outsider perspective. None of us know what it's like to wake up next to somebody else's spouse every single day and feeding their kids every morning at breakfast, and what bedtime is like. And I mean, the day-to-day lives that we all have, our truth, you can't explain it in a movie, in a podcast, in a written article. There's just no way to explicate. There's no way to put it out there so that somebody else can actually understand. Maybe there will be some way to do that with once we interface our brains with computers and we download each other's experiences and feelings. Maybe there'll be a way sometime in the future, but right now there's absolutely no way to do it, and I think we need to remember that at all times. And it's one of the interesting things about communications in 2017. I know I'm way off the topic of sports now, but I think about this kind of stuff all the time, especially as I talk to you guys in the comments section on Waiting for Next Year, or on Twitter and Facebook and different places. Some of you I end up meeting in person. It's just really interesting. We all are collecting these weird little snapshots of each other, and we have all these different versions of each other. And I don't know that anybody knows any of us, and we all think we know each other, and we all think we know each other's experiences, and we know it's important to know how little we actually know. And I think about this a lot with athletes too. I've talked about it, with Iman Shumpert last year, and he comes under fire a lot for the way he plays basketball. And I snipe at him sometimes too, not directly, but I snipe at his game on Twitter, and I talk to different people about it. And Dan Lobby talked about his history of sniping at Ryan Hollins and making fun of him for his different histories as a player with the Cleveland Cavaliers. But these are real people with real histories and real lives that they're bringing all of that with them every time they perform or fail or succeed in front of our eyes. And there's so many variables and so many factors that go into every single thing every day, whether it's us personally or the athletes that we want to achieve, on the big stage for our teams. And it's just, so it's interesting. It's interesting. I think about it all the time, and I used to apply it only to people in my personal life. Now I apply it to people that I know through social media. I apply it to the athletes that I watch on my favorite teams. And it's really changed my perspective. It's made me more empathetic. I think I went through a phase where social media and getting closer together with these different people probably jaded me and made me less compassionate and less empathetic towards other people. And now, through a combination of factors and experiences, I think I'm more empathetic than I've ever been. Maybe it's just me. I'm not really sure. But those are the things that I've been thinking about lately. Also, I want to make one more recommendation. So I do recommend S-Town, by the way. I recommend that podcast. I think you should check it out. And even if you hate it, let me know. Talk to me about it. Let me know whether you liked it, whether you hated it, what you liked or didn't like about it. Because maybe I'm thinking about it differently. Maybe you're thinking about it differently. Maybe I could put it through a different lens. But I've been watching, and we're not finished with it, but we started watching Travelers, which is a drama sci-fi show on Netflix, and it's really cool so far. It's kind of an interesting thing. It involves time travel and life and death and trying to save the world, and so you're following this group of people who are kind of teleported into, so that their version of time travel is that they teleport into people who were supposed to die. They know when people were supposed to die, and so from another time they intervene in the people's death, and they become those people, and those people don't end up dying. They take over their body before the time of death. And it's really interesting. And now, as I say this to you, what I'm trying to find out is what their mission actually is. What catastrophic thing are they looking to avoid? What major fork in the road do they need to kind of yank the train track so it goes in a different direction? That's what we're trying to figure out right now. And I love this kind of show. It's something that's been missing. I've really missed the TV mystery, the serialized TV mystery, ever since Lost, really. Breaking Bad was great, but that wasn't really a mystery and didn't encompass sci-fi. And there were a bunch of lost pretenders that didn't really live up to the hype. But I think Travelers, at least so far, is living up to the hype. It's a lot of actors that you don't really know. You might know Eric McCormick, but even still, he's not like such a well-known quantity that you're probably tainted into thinking that he is typecast as something else. That was the cool thing about Lost, is all those actors, you might have recognized some of them, but none of them came with such an acting resume that you couldn't remove them from their previous roles. And that's part of what I think about this cast and Travelers, is they're really good, but none of them are so recognizable or so tied to a previous role that you can't imagine them inhabiting this one. And so it's really cool. I don't know where it goes, and maybe I'll hate it by the end, but 3 episodes heading into the 4th episode in, really enjoying that one so far. And it's been a while since I've really been hooked on a show where I couldn't wait for the next night to watch it. So, but that's all I got. That's all I got. Sorry that I don't have a guest yet this week. I'm working on it. I'm working on some big guests. It just hasn't worked out yet, but it will. It will. I'm still on the trail of a few different guests, and hopefully the ones that didn't come to fruition this week will come into fruition later on. So that's all I got. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you next time. It's been the waitingfornextyear.com podcast.